Hi, today we will talk about attitude. Its definition, concept, description, characteristics, and examples. Oh, chocolate ice cream! I just love it. I hate smokers. Black color looks really classy. Yak, I can't stand seafood. I love social psychology, and so on. All the sentences I just said or the statements I made show that we react to our environment in an evaluative manner. We are constantly making judgments about whether objects, events, ourselves, and others are favorable or unfavorable, likable or unlikable, good or bad. This falls in the domain of attitude. Social psychologists who study attitudes investigate factors involved in such evaluations, how they are formed, changed, and so on. So, in this podcast, we will examine the concept of an attitude, how attitude is formed, and what functions are served by holding attitudes. When you have finished listening to this podcast, you should have some understanding of attitude and its relevance. Let's look at the definition. The study of attitudes has been at the forefront of social psychology for many years. Attitude field is vast and diverse, accumulating over 80 plus years. The study of attitudes has been a core topic in social psychology. Attitudes are involved in practically every other area of the discipline, including social perception, interpersonal attraction, prejudice and discrimination, conformity, compliance, and so on. The chief reason why the concept of attitude is so central to psychology is because the aim of psychology is to study behavior, and attitudes are supposed to influence behavior. Let us first try to understand what exactly an attitude is. Early on, attitudes were defined very broadly. Allport, 1935, defined attitude as a mental and neural state of readiness organized through experience and exerting a directive or dynamic influence upon the individual's response to all objects and situations with which it is released or related. With such a broad definition, it is easy to see why attitudes were seen as the central construct of social psychology. Since Allport, the definition of attitude has evolved considerably and become narrower. Attitudes are now looked as evaluative statements, either favorable or unfavorable, concerning some aspects of social world. For instance, Fishbein and Edson, 1975, define an attitude as a learned predisposition to respond in a consistently favorable or unfavorable manner with respect to a given object. Object includes people, things, events, and issues. When you use such words as like, dislike, love, hate, good, bad, yuck, etc., you are describing your attitudes in this view. Attitudes then are evaluations of a particular person, group, action, or thing. A similar definition was proposed by Eagly and Chaikin, 1993, according to whom attitude is a psychological tendency that is expressed by evaluating a particular entity with some degree of favor or disfavor. Thus, an attitude is focused on a particular entity or object rather than all objects and situations with which it is related. Psychologists use specialized term to describe certain classes of attitudes. For example, an attitude towards the self is called self-esteem. Negative attitudes towards specific groups are called prejudice. Attitude towards individuals are called interpersonal attraction. And attitude towards own job is called job satisfaction. Attitudes, values, and beliefs. There are two psychological constructs closely associated with attitudes, values, and beliefs. Attitudes and values. The most frequently cited definition of what constitutes a human value is offered by Rokeach, 1973, as an enduring belief that a specific mode of conduct or end state of existence is personally or socially preferable to an opposite or converse mode of conduct or end state of existence. Values constitute an important aspect of self-concept and serve as guiding principles for an individual. Rokeach argued that considered together, values form values system, where a value system is an enduring organization of beliefs concerning preferable modes of conduct or end statement or existence along a continuum of importance. 1973. Thus, the importance of different values should co-vary with the importance of others in the value system. For example, you may value honesty over success. Human values are strongly perceptive in nature and form the core around which other less enduring beliefs are organized. As such, they are important in a range of other processes like attitudes. It is contended that the formation of specific attitudes is predicated upon more general values. Values indirectly influence behavior through their influence on attitudes. Although values can shape attitudes, it does not, however, mean that values shape all attitudes. For example, your attitude towards, say, love versus arranged marriage is probably shaped by your values, but your preference for one brand of toothpaste over another is less likely to be influenced by important life goals. It is clear that some attitudes are formed through the influence of long-standing values internalized early in life. These are called symbolic attitudes because the attitude object is a symbol of something else. In contrast, there are some attitudes that are based on utility, a direct benefits and cost of the attitude object. These are called instrumental attitudes because they are instrumental to meet those needs. Interestingly, the same attitude object could serve a symbolic or an instrumental need. For example, your decision to eat only vegetarian food could be based on utility. If you stay in a place like Europe or America where it is more difficult to get vegetarian food, or taste instrumentally based attitudes versus consideration of animal rights and right to live symbolically based values. Values are relatively more stable and enduring than attitudes, since they are basic notions about what is right and wrong. Attitudes are less stable than values. Further, if we know an individual's values, we are better able to predict his behavior in a particular situation. Attitudes and beliefs. Beliefs are cognitions about the probability that an object or event is associated with a given attribute. Fishbein and Edson, 1975. Some theorists regard belief as one component of an attitude. However, There are differences between attitude and belief. Attitude can be considered as the sum of beliefs. A person can have many beliefs about a phenomenon, positive or negative. This person will have an attitude towards what that phenomena based on overall evolution of his beliefs. For example, I may believe that Pepsi is sweet. It contains preservatives. It is high on calorie. Belief: I like Pepsi. Attitude. According to Eagly and Chaiken 1993, it is possible to verify or falsify some beliefs at least using external criteria. For example, the belief that water freezes at 0 degrees Celsius can be verified either factually or even by agreement among many individuals. Yet, few attitudes can be tested using such interjudged consensus. Most social attitudes, such as political, aesthetic, or consumer preferences, are largely variable across people. You may like Pepsi, your friend may not like it at all. Both beliefs and values are central to the dynamic forces that form and transform existing attitudes. Let's talk about formation of attitudes. So there are certain factors on which formation of attitudes is dependent on, like classical conditioning, genetic factors, instrumental conditioning, and even observational learning. Right from our birth onwards, we are exposed to a wide variety of stimuli, both directly and indirectly, which lead to our acquiring particular attitudes towards the attitudinal object. It is believed that attitudes are by and large acquired as a result of various life experience. Although a small but growing body of evidence indicates that attitudes may be influenced by genetic factors too. Classical conditioning. The process of classical conditioning was first described by Pavlov in his experiments on dogs. He found that after repeated pairing of an unconditioned stimuli, example bell, with a conditioned stimulus, dog, the latter acquires the capacity to evoke a conditioned response, salivation, similar to the old unconditioned response, salivation. It has been suggested that in the same way that a bell can evoke a physiological response, classical conditioning can produce a positive or negative attitude towards a previously neutral object. Arthur and Carolyn Starts, 1958, were two of the first researchers who systematically studied the classical conditioning of attitudes. They conducted an experiment in which the goal was to condition positive and negative attitudes to the names of countries, Sweden and Holland, which previously were regarded neither positively nor negatively. During 108 conditioning trials, 2 nationalities were always followed by a negative word, example, failure. 2 were paired with positive adjectives, example, happy, gift. And 2 others were paired with neutral words, example, table. At the end of the experiment, it was indeed found that participants held more positive attitudes towards the nationalities associated with positive words and more negative attitudes towards those associated with negative words. Classical conditioning could play a role in establishing some of the emotional components of attitudes and prejudice. Further, through classical conditioning, people may come to have powerful attitudinal reactions to social objects even in the absence of first-hand experience. Hence, children who hear repeated pairings of words in their parents' conversation, such as, say, Muslims aggressive, Muslims fundamentalist, throughout their early years of development may come to adopt such negative attitudes themselves without even meeting them. Instrumental conditioning. Child, Mummy, doesn't Mossy look nice in her green dress? She really knows how to carry herself. Mother, you're absolutely right, dear. I have felt that for some time now and was hoping you would agree. Your dress sense is really getting evolved. You can now suggest me what to wear the next time we go out. This kind of conversation illustrates quite clearly the role of reinforcement in attitude formation. Following her mother's agreement, it is likely that the child's initial response of a positive attitude about Mossy will be reinforced. Of course, had the child remarked the Mossy looks awful, the mother might have reacted with displeasure, thereby punishing the remark. Following reward, the child's attitude is likely to be strengthened, whereas punishment would probably lead to a weakening of the attitude. This is the process of instrumental conditioning, a basic form of learning studied by Thorndike 1911 and Skinner 1938. According to this, behaviors that are followed by positive outcomes tend to be strengthened, while those that are followed by negative outcomes are suppressed. The degree to which attitudes are verbally or non-verbally reinforced by others will affect the acquiring and maintenance of attitudes. For example, early in your life, if your parents and teachers praised you for doing well in studies, you may have doubled your efforts and developed a positive attitude towards studies. However, if your friend's parents did not acknowledge her achievement in studies, she would have probably developed a negative attitude towards studies. Observational learning. In both classical and instrumental conditioning approaches to attitude formation, the person has direct contact or experience, as in case of Start's experiment, with the attitudinal object. However, it is also true that people may acquire attitudes simply by observing the reward and punishment that others get for their espousal of those attitudes. The phenomena by which a person acquires new forms of behavior or thought simply by observing others is called observational learning. For example, you might develop a negative attitude towards the college canteen if you saw someone throwing up after having a meal there. Although your friend's newly formed dislike is due to instrumental conditioning, your negative attitude is a result of observational learning. The rationale behind commercials of, say, Pizza Hut would show someone ordering and then obviously enjoying a pizza is that the viewer will also form a positive attitude vicariously and imitate such behavior in the future. Genetic factor. Some research, Waller 1990, Keller 1992, indicates that our attitudes, at least a tendency to develop certain views about various topics or issues, are inherited. For example, Arway 1989 studied that level of job satisfaction of 34 sets of identical twins separated from each other at an early age and found that approximately 30% of job satisfaction appears to be explainable by genetic factors. Tesser 1993 has argued that hereditary variable may affect attitudes, but believes that they may do so indirectly. Additional research suggests that genetic factors play a stronger role in shaping some attitudes than others. For example, attitudes involving gut-level preferences, say a preference for a certain kind of food, may be more strongly influenced by genetic factor than attitudes that are more cognitive in nature, say attitude towards environmental conservation. Let's talk about functions of attitudes. From our previous discussion, it is obvious that we hold many attitudes about almost all aspects of the world around us. Are you wondering why we bother forming the many attitudes that each one of us have? In this particular discussion, now we will throw light on some functions served by attitudes. The functional utility of attitudes was pointed out by Allport in 1935 in his classic discussion of attitudes. According to him, attitude was a social psychology's most indispensable concept. He stated, without guiding attitudes, the individual is confused and baffled. Attitudes determine for each individual what he will see and hear, what he will think and what he will do. They engender meaning upon the world. They draw lines about the segregate an otherwise chaotic environment. They are our methods for finding out our way about in an ambiguous universe. Allport 1935. This has been termed as the object appraisal function by Fazio 2000. According to him, the mere possession of any attitude is useful to the individual in terms of orienting him to the attitudinal object. This object appraisal function can be regarded as the primary value of having an attitude. Fazio goes on to state, every attitude, regardless of any other functional benefit that it may also provide, serves this object appraisal function. Similarly, both Katz 1960 and Smith, Brunner and White 1956 commented on this object appraisal function in their functional theory of attitudes. One of the fundamental assumptions of functional theory is that we often hold or express our attitudes and preferences in order to communicate something about ourselves to other people. This implies that attitudes towards specific issues, product, or ideas serve to convey broader information about us to those who are interested. For example, Smith and Team 1956 said attitudes aid us in classifying for action the objects of the environment, and they make appropriate response tendencies available for coping with these objects. Katz 1960 takes the view that attitudes are determined by the functions they serve for us. People hold given attitudes towards these attitudes help them achieve their basic goals. Katz distinguishes 4 types of psychological functions that attitudes meet. Let us examine these 4 functions now. Utilitarian function, also called instrumental function. We develop certain attitudes towards objects that aid or reward us. We want to maximize rewards and minimize penalties. Katz says we develop positive attitudes towards those objects that are associated with rewards and develop negative attitudes towards those that are associated with punishment. For example, if you are a graduate looking for a job, if you belong to a minority community, say other backward classes, which has job reservation, you will favor the political party that introduced such reservation. On the other hand, if you belong to the majority, you might develop a negative attitude towards the same party because it took away some jobs from the general quota and reserved them for OBCs. We are more likely to change our attitudes if doing so allows us to fulfill our goals or avoid undesirable consequences. If you think this function seems close to instrumental conditioning, you are right. It does come from a behaviorist perspective. Knowledge function. We all have a need to attain some degree of meaningful, stable, clear, and organized view of the world. Just as most of us have a need to maintain unorganized cupboard. Attitudes satisfy this knowledge function by providing a frame of reference for organizing our world so that it makes sense. Using such a cognitive perspective, attitudes serve as schemas that help us in organizing and interpreting social information. For example, people who hold traditional gender stereotypes such as a woman's place is in the home will have greater satisfaction with the current status of women at work and will explain that low number of women in high position in office glass ceiling effect with traditional gender explanations. Via such attitudes as stereotypes, we can bring order and clarity to the complexities of human life, if misplaced. Ego defensive function. Some attitudes serve to protect us from acknowledging basic truth about ourselves or the harsh realities of life. These can help a person cope with emotional conflicts and protect self-esteem. As you would have noticed, this comes from a psychoanalytic perspective and assume that attitudes serve as defense mechanisms. For example, a new mother might feel bad about herself after experiencing a sudden urge to hit her crying child. And to defend against this threat to self-esteem, she might develop a positive attitude towards spoiling the child. The rationalization might be, of course, I don't want her to get spoiled by giving in to her whims every time. Value expressive function. Value expressive attitudes show who we are and what we stand for. Hence, they serve to demonstrate one's self-image to others and to express our basic values. This function comes from a humanistic perspective. It seems logical to assume that only important and strongly self-related central attitudes should serve the value expressive function. For example, you may have a negative attitude towards homosexuals because your religion considers homosexuality to be immoral. Although, I personally don't think any religion degrades homosexuality. The fact that you may never have had a bad experience with anyone who was homosexual is irrelevant. Your negative attitudes satisfies your value expressive function, allowing you to express an important value associated with a religious group with which you strongly identify. By extension, if you don't strongly identify with your religious group, your negative attitude towards homosexuals will not have much effect on your self-esteem. Social identity function. Other than the basic four functions served by attitudes suggested by Katz-Schawit 1989, added another social identity function of attitudes. This refers to the informativeness of attitude for person impressions, or how much attitude appears to convey about the people who hold them. Schawit and Nelson 2000 suggested that products tend to engage a utilitarian function to the extent that they are seen as expressing identity and values. The product is generally displayed in public or is visible to others, or the product is widely seen as symbolizing membership in a particular group. For example, the purchase of an Indian flag on the Republic Day may be driven primarily by social identity goals. In addition to investigating how attitude function vary among people, current researchers in the field also consider the possibility that different attitude objects may actually serve different functions for different people. For example, purchasing certain product to fulfill utilitarian needs, computer, television, etc., and other products to satisfy value expressive needs, for example, particular brand of car. Further, an An attitude changes when it no longer serves its function and the individual feels blocked or frustrated. Thus, those who are interested in changing other people's attitude must first determine what functions those attitudes serve for the targeted individuals and then use an appropriate approach. So, here we have discussed the definition, concept, formation, and functions of attitude. Attitudes are generally positive or negative views of person, including oneself, place, thing, or event, the attitude object. They differ somewhat from values and beliefs. Values are concerned with important life goals and may shape attitudes. Beliefs are one component of attitudes that can be verified or falsified using external criteria. Attitudes are formed by a number of mechanisms. In classical conditioning, attitudes form when a previously neutral attitude object comes to evoke an attitude response by being paired with some other object that naturally evokes the attitude response. Another powerful way in which attitudes are formed is through instrumental conditioning, using reward and punishment contingencies. Some attitudes are also formed via observational learning by vicariously experiencing rewards and punishments given to others. Finally, genetic factors play a role in shaping some attitude. The functional approach says that we hold attitudes that fit our needs. All attitudes, regardless of any other needs that they fulfill, also serve an object appraisal function. Early functional theorists proposed 4 psychological functions that attitudes may serve: utilitarian, knowledge, ego defensive, and value expressive. A social identity function of attitude was added later. Thank you for listening.